The Great Gatsby, Chapter 3. So far we have been to East Egg in Chapter 1. We have been to the Valley of Ashes and Manhattan in Chapter 2. And now we are going to West Egg, to one of Gatsby's parties. This begins with Nick noticing the music that comes from Gatsby's house. Right away, you'll see lots of different color references. He has a blue garden. He has a yellow station wagon that goes to meet people at the train. The first several pages here are going to be very detailed descriptions about how elaborate these parties are. He has people who come in just, on the train. They come because his Rolls Royce goes to Manhattan and brings parties of people back to his house. He has all these servants who come, and, extra gardener comes to work on the yard. We have oranges and lemons being delivered for freshly squeezed juices. We have a lot of references to alcohol. Here they're talking about the fact that young girls at his parties are having cordials that they don't even know what they're called. And the reason is because we are in Prohibition, and so people cannot access alcohol unless they go to a party like this where it's being served. We have, again, a reference to yellow cocktail music. We have people acting with prodigality. So this is, if you think about the story from the Bible, the prodigal son. Prodigality means somebody who is incredibly careless about the way they live and the way they spend money. We will actually see carelessness being developed as a theme, kind of a recurring element that will keep coming up again and again. There's a description over here of how the evening progresses, in the sense that people are getting drunker and having more and more fun every minute. This whole chapter is full of references to actual entertainers. It talks about a woman coming out and dancing on the dance floor like Frisco. Frisco is an allusion to Joe Frisco, who was a vaudeville entertainer and comic, and he was really well known for his jazz dancing. Another guest comes out, and it turns out that she's Gilda Gray's understudy. Gilda Gray was an American actress and dancer, and she was the one who invented, so to speak, or is credited for the dance called the shimmy. She would have been in Ziegfeld's Follies, which was a production that started in 1922. It says here that Nick was the only person, he thinks, who was actually invited to Gatsby's party. He gets invited by one of Gatsby's servants, one of his drivers, who comes over wearing blue again and invites Nick to his little party, which of course is a giant understatement. Nick goes to the party in white slacks. So remember, white is a reference to old money. So this definitely sets him apart a little bit from the typical blue and gold that we're going to see from the people who are attending. There's a lot of really wonderful figurative language in this chapter. He talks about the people moving in swirls and eddies, which kind of makes us think about water. He also says right away he's trying to find Gatsby. He would like to meet his neighbor, who he has only seen from his backyard, and he can't seem to find him. So right away, again, we're seeing that Gatsby is mysterious. No one really knows where he is. This is a very relatable section of this chapter. Nick is at this party and doesn't know a single person. And so he starts drinking just because he needs to have something to do, and sort of stands by the bar because where else can a person go if they don't know anybody? And then he does see Jordan Baker. So this is a tremendous relief to him. It's somebody he actually knows. And he says he finds it necessary to attach himself to someone. And obviously he's grateful that he actually knows her. This whole thing, hello, I roared. He's very eager to have somebody to be attached to at this party where he knows no one. we're going to have a lot of descriptions of sort of meaningless conversations as they float from group to group. We're introduced to two twin girls who are wearing, or two girls, I should say, who are wearing twin dresses. They're wearing yellow dresses. They tell Jordan they're sorry that she didn't win the golf tournament. Then they continue talking. They sit down at a table with the two girls in yellow and three other men who are introduced as Mr. Mumble. This is sort of a joke. They're not literally, that's not their name, Mr. Mumble. This reminds me of the Charlie Brown movies, when all the adults in the movie have like no actual words. They kind of go wah 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 wah. That's how Nick hears these names. It's just like Mr. blah blah blah. He's not really remembering anybody's name. Then we have a description of Lucille, and who's one of the girls. It's her name. It's not Mrs. McKee. And she talks about how when she was at the last Gatsby party, she tore her dress, and within the next week, Mr. Gatsby sent her a new one. So she says, isn't that, so nice, but also, isn't that sort of funny that he'll do anything like that? He doesn't want any trouble with anybody. So again, there's very mysterious, why is it that Gatsby doesn't want trouble with anybody? As a reader, I would be having so many questions about what is it that Gatsby does? Why is everybody saying all these strange things about him and speculating about what it is he must do? I have underlined gas blue as the color of the dress. We have so many color references in this chapter. There are more rumors. These are often quiz questions. Somebody told me they thought he killed a man. Someone else said he was a German spy during the war. Someone else says, no, he was in the American army during the war. And then somebody says, I bet he killed a man. So it's just continual questioning about who is he and how does he have all this money. At some point in the evening, they sit down with another group of people, he and Jordan do, and this group is different from the people that he's been meeting so far. They are preserving a dignified homogeneity and assumed to itself the function of representing the staid nobility of the countryside. East Egg condescending to West Egg. So these guests that they sit down with next are actually people from East Egg. So they are the old money and they are at this party. So they're definitely out of their element and they are maintaining their superior reputation. And this is where Jordan and Nick end up sitting for a little bit longer. Then Jordan suggests that they get away from those people too and try and go find Gatsby. Jordan acknowledges that she can tell Nick is uncomfortable because he hasn't met Gatsby yet. They go into Gatsby's home looking for him, and they find this grand library, and there is a new character here. And he's going to end up being referred to as Owl Eyes, but they talk to a middle-aged man with enormous owl-eyed spectacles. So this makes me think of that Dr. T.J. Eckleburg billboard, that, again, this is somebody who has, very large eyes who might be watching over people. And he is very excited about this library. He goes on to tell Jordan and Nick that the books on the shelves are real. It never occurred to me that books would not be real, but certainly in homes like this that are so massive, when you're trying to make an impression, people would buy fake books and just put them in the library shelves to look like it's, some wonderful scholarly place. And Owl Eyes is saying these books are real, absolutely real. They have pages and everything. He says, I thought they'd be a nice durable cardboard. Matter of fact, they're absolutely real pages. And here, let me show you. And he starts pulling out the books and showing them how real they are. We have an allusion here again. He says, It's a bona fide piece of printed matter. It fooled me. This fella's a regular Belasco. So David Belasco was a theater producer at the turn of the century, and he was really well known for having very elaborate theater sets that looked absolutely real. What's interesting to me here is that Owl Eyes points out that even though the books are real, the pages were not cut. Now, I didn't really understand what that meant. What that means is that before a book is put out for purchase, the very last step in publishing is to cut the pages, to trim the pages so that they can be turned and read. Apparently, during this time period, it was common to be able to buy books that had the pages uncut. Bookstores would sell them that way specifically because people wanted to display the books but had no intention of reading them. So Gatsby bought real books, but he bought them uncut. So after all this discussion, they keep looking and looking and looking for Gatsby, and they don't find him. So on the next page, they go back to the party again. There's another reference to silver, lots of music. They're sitting at a table with a man about the same age as Nick and a rowdy little girl, and who laughs and giggles all the time. The alcohol now is flowing. They're saying that champagne is being served in finger bowl size glasses. So that would be like a pretty good size glass. And Nick has already had 2 of these. So I think we can assume that Nick is going to be getting drunk for the 3rd time in his life at this party. And then the man turns to Nick and says that, you look familiar. Were you in the 3rd Division during the war? And Nick says, well, yes, I was in the 9th Machine Gun Battalion. And this man that they're sitting with says, oh, I was in the same vicinity. I remember you. And then he tells him how he just bought a hydroplane and was going to go try it in the morning. And he invites Nick to go with him up in the hydroplane. This is a very strange little phrase here. Want to go with me, old sport, is how he asks it, which is a little bit affected. And then they keep chatting a bit time more, and Jordan says, are you having a nice time now? And Nick says, yes. And then he turns to this man he's been chatting with, and he says, this is an unusual party for me. I haven't even seen the host. I live over there. And he waves his hand to his small house across the way. And then he says, and this man Gatsby sent over his chauffeur with an invitation. The man looks at Nick as if he's confused, and he says, I'm Gatsby. So this whole time he's been talking to Gatsby. And then Gatsby says, I thought you knew, old sport. I'm afraid I'm not a very good host. This is very ironic because he is throwing the most elaborate party than anyone has ever been to, and he lets anybody who wants to come, and yet he hasn't really introduced himself to anybody. This is a very beautiful paragraph. I'm not going to read this entire thing, but this is the first time that Nick really shares how Gatsby impresses him and just what are the qualities about Gatsby that are so memorable. And this ties back to that first paragraph in chapter 1, where he says that Gatsby is exempt from his judgment because of just his qualities as a person. And he talks about Gatsby having a rare smile with a quality of eternal reassurance in it that you may come across 4 or 5 times in life, and how it seems that he deeply understands the person who he's looking at. And then all of a sudden, he has a different impression of Gatsby, that he's like an elegant young roughneck, a year or 2 over 30, whose elaborate formality of speech just missed being absurd. So he's very confused by his impression. Again, contradiction here in these behaviors of Gatsby. I think it's also important to note that in this paragraph, Nick is speaking in the second person. He's saying you, so he's including us as the reader in this experience seeing somebody who seems so genuine and warm, and then at the flip of a switch seems so fake. Then Gatsby has to leave because Chicago is calling him. This is in the middle of his party at night on a weekend, so this is a little bit suspicious. He talks about how he sort of had imagined Gatsby to be, when you consider that he lives in this major mansion that looks like some European villa. He thought he would be middle-aged and sort of overweight, but no, he's not. And no one knows exactly who he is, which is what Jordan says. She's like, he's just a man named Gatsby. More rumors. Jordan says that Gatsby told him he went to Oxford, and Jordan doesn't believe it. Here, Nick reflects on the fact that, young people don't just get a house like this, that there is something that needs to be understood about Gatsby that nobody really knows. I thought this was a really interesting quote here. Jordan says, anyhow, he gives large parties, said Jordan, changing the subject with an urban distaste for the concrete. And I like large parties. They're so intimate. At small parties, there isn't any privacy. This is very ironic, but it's absolutely true. You can have an intimate conversation with someone at a large party and then get away from that person if you want to. So this was, I thought, I do think about this quote in my life at various times. It is very true. We have some vocabulary words, echolalia. Oh my God, there's a tongue twister for you. That basically means meaningless speech, just words coming out of people's mouth that don't make any sense, words being repeated, just nonsense. And that just is showing us that all around Nick is just a lot of talking that doesn't really mean anything. It's also important to note here that there is an entire orchestra at this party, and they are going to play the entire piece by Vladimir Tostov called The Jazz History of the World. So this is our first really heavy-handed reference to the Jazz Age. This entire book is set during that time, and that music is an important part of underscoring the theme. Then Nick looks over at Gatsby, and he sees that he is standing alone on the marble steps and looking out at all of his guests. His tan skin was drawn attractively tight on his face, and his short hair looked as though it were trimmed every day. I could see nothing sinister about him. I wondered if the fact that he was not drinking helped to set him off from his guests, for it seemed to me that he grew more correct as the fraternal hilarity increased. So he is not partying with his guests. He is not drinking. So this drinking versus not drinking, definitely, we've seen this before because that was the case with Catherine. She doesn't drink either. By the time this performance of the Jazz History of the World is over, girls are swooning, crying, flirting. Everybody's very emotional. Then something sort of shocking happens. Gatsby's butler comes and asks Miss Baker if she would go in and speak to Gatsby alone, which is, again, very mysterious. And Nick is left by himself. It's 2 a.m. So we have some parallelism here. The party in chapter 2 also went way into the wee hours. People are becoming more and more drunk. Over here, we have even more sloppiness. Nobody wants to leave. So in this whole page, husbands are trying to get their wives to go home, and they're all crying. They're yelling at their husbands, saying that they always have to leave early. There's an interesting reference here. I think this is a nice simile. At intervals, she appeared suddenly at his side like an angry diamond and hissed, "You promised." So this is an example of a husband and wife having a fight about something. The reluctance to go home was not confined to wayward men. Nobody wanted to leave this amazing party. Whenever he sees I'm having a good time, he wants to go home, is what one of the wives says. We're always the first to leave, said another one. And one of the men says, well, we're almost the last tonight. So eventually they throw their wives over their shoulders to get them to go. Then Jordan Baker and Gatsby come out together, and Jordan comes back to Nick, and she says, I've just heard the most amazing thing. They were in there for an hour, and she says, it was simply amazing, but I swore I wouldn't tell it. So she can't even tell Nick what it was they talked about. So this is bait for us as a reader. Obviously, we want to know too. Then we have another reference to just deception. There's a lot of sort of fake behavior in this chapter. When he says good night to Gatsby, Gatsby says, don't mention it, he enjoined me eagerly. Don't give it another thought, old sport. The familiar expression held no more familiarity than the hand which reassuringly brushed my shoulder. And don't forget, we're going up in the hydroplane tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Well, this is shocking to me. It's past 2 in the morning. How the heck is Nick going to get up in a hydroplane at 9 the next morning? I have no idea. Then we have another phone call. Philadelphia wants you on the phone. This is at like 2 or 3 in the morning. What the heck does he do? At the end of this party, as everybody is leaving, there is a car crash. This next page and a half can be confusing to read because the people in the car crash are also confused about what has happened. Somebody has driven into a wall, like a stone wall along the property, like drove into a ditch, crashed into a wall, the wheel has come off, but everybody who is around there, who is looking at the wreckage, is also drunk and doesn't fully understand what happened. Owl Eyes is standing by the car that crashed into the wall, and everybody thinks that Owl Eyes is the one who crashed it. But in fact, he said, I wasn't driving. There's another man in the car. And then very gradually, part by part, a pale, dangling individual stepped out of the wreck, pawing tentatively at the ground with a large, uncertain dancing shoe. He doesn't even understand that he crashed. He said, what happens? Did we run out of gas? Everyone tries to point out to him that he's crashed into a wall. He has no idea. He thinks he can get in the car and keep driving. People are honking. It's an absolute mess. Then it says, Nick says, a sudden emptiness seemed to flow now from the windows and the great doors, endowing with complete isolation the figure of the host, who stood on the porch, his hand up in a formal gesture of farewell. This image of Gatsby reminds me of chapter 1, when Nick sees him standing, looking out across the bay with his hands outstretched and trembling. Now we're going to get some background. There's a little shift here. It says, reading over what I have written so far, I see I have given the impression that the events of the 3 nights several weeks apart were all that absorbed me. On the contrary, they were merely casual events in a crowded summer. So this is just saying, like, this isn't all he did was go to these parties. He's also reminding us that he is in New York trying to make himself a career as a bondsman. This talks about his life as a solitary professional, and it is sort of sad. He says, most of the time he worked at a place called the Probity Trust, which might be a quiz question. He even says he had a little girlfriend. I even had a short affair with a girl who lived in Jersey City and worked in the accounting department. That could be a quiz question. But he breaks up with her because her brother seems to not like Nick. After he's done working, he has dinner at the Yale Club. He goes upstairs to the library after he's eaten, and he studies. He reads about investments and securities, trying to just learn the business that he's in. And then he starts to walk home, and he describes his walk home. He strolls down Madison Avenue past the Murray Hill Hotel. He goes to Pennsylvania Station. He likes to imagine himself with women that he sees. Now, he's not being creepy here. He's not literally following women to their apartments, but he imagines, like when he sees a woman, that, oh, maybe that's the kind of woman I'll be with. And he imagines what it would be like to go with her for dinner or to go home with her. He feels most of the time very lonely. And he also perceives loneliness in other people. He definitely wishes he belonged. He doesn't feel like he belongs there yet. He has a sinking feeling in his heart. Finally, he does start dating Jordan Baker. Makes me wonder, as a reader, is this because he just has easy access to her? Just like at the party, he attached himself to her so he wouldn't be alone. I wonder if that's why he started dating her. He says he wasn't in love, but he was curious about her. He does find out, and this is definitely a quiz question, he does find out what the mystery is about her and like what he remembers having read about her in the paper. Right here it's described that she had been playing a golf tournament and had been accused of cheating. She'd been accused of moving her ball, and then apparently that accusation just sort of went away. So his realization here is that Jordan is dishonest. And it says here at the bottom of this page, Jordan Baker instinctively avoided clever, shrewd men. And now I saw that this was because she felt safer on a plane, looking where one of my kids drew a picture there, where any divergence from a code would be thought impossible. She was incurably dishonest. She wasn't able to endure being at a disadvantage. And given this unwillingness, I suppose she had begun dealing in subterfuges when she was very young in order to keep that cool, insolent smile turned to the world and yet satisfy the demands of her hard, jaunty body. So she is trying to be successful as a golfer. She's trying to be an independent woman, and sometimes she achieves this by being dishonest. This is interesting too. A contradiction. I mean, he sounds like he's judging her up here, but then he says, dishonesty in a woman is a thing you never blame deeply. So I'm kind of wondering why that is. Maybe it's because women do have to work harder at that time, especially to get anything that would be equal to what a man has. Then he also discovers, and this is an important thing that might pop up on a quiz, that Jordan is a terrible driver. And he says, either you ought to be more careful or you shouldn't drive at all, is what Nick tells her. And Jordan says, well, I am careful. And Nick says, no, you're not. And then she says, well, other people are. And Nick is confused what that has to do with anything. And this is an important quote. Jordan says, they'll keep out of my way, she insisted. It takes two to make an accident. So this is another reference to car accidents. Sometimes I see this quote coming up on quote tests. A lot of times teachers will have, quote identifications, and this is a classic, memorable quote from Jordan. And Nick says, well, what if you meet someone just as careless as yourself? And she says, I hope I never will. I hate careless people. That's why I like you. It's another important quote from Jordan. So that comment from Jordan is reminding us that we're supposed to think that Nick is not careless, that he is careful. Nick goes on to say that he is slow thinking and full of interior rules that act as brakes on my desires. That goes along with being careful. And I knew that first I had to get myself definitely out of that tangle back home. So before he can fully commit to Jordan, he needs to get out of a tangle back home. This reminds me of the conversation he had with Daisy and Tom when they asked him if he was engaged back in the Midwest. And he said, no, he wasn't. But it does seem like maybe he left a girlfriend there who's expecting to hear from him. He says, nevertheless, there was a vague understanding that had to be tactfully broken off before I was free. So obviously that girl's waiting for him or expecting to be proposed to. Then he says, everyone suspects himself of at least one of the cardinal virtues, and this is mine. I am one of the few honest people that I have ever known. So this also tells us that Nick would like us to think he is a reliable narrator because he is honest. So our new characters in this chapter, Owl Eyes, who reminds me very much of the eyes overlooking the Valley of Ashes on that billboard. He was in the library. He's the one who said that he was so impressed that the books were real. He's also the one who was in the car as a passenger that got crashed into a wall. And we finally meet Gatsby, who not only is mysteriously described by everybody at the party, but his behavior is mysterious too, because he seems very genuine and then he seems very fake. He's getting business calls in the middle of the night on the weekend. We don't really know what he does. Some of the repeated ideas that are introduced in this chapter are deception, dishonesty, carelessness. We see the colors blue and gold, and also we do see, I think, one reference to silver, and then car crashes. This is another idea that will be developed throughout the story.